Quicksters, welcome. I'm Susie Tomanchuk along with my great co-host, James Capps. How are you, James?
I am fantastic.
Awesome. So glad that our Quicksters decided to be here today because this is a good one. I know it's going to be. I don't, I'm just saying, I'm forecasting that this is going to be an over the top.
I have a bias towards our episodes being better. Good.
Ooh, I like that. Foreshadowing. Okay, so maybe you're not supposed to throw that out, but So I just have to say, one of my really good friends that I respect deeply, she is a rock star executive coach for some major logos. And I just respect her opinion so much. And we were talking about influence and how influence can cloud our ability to see ourselves. And so we were talking about how can we talk to executives about when you walking into a meeting or walking into a situation that you're sure you know about, to ask yourself, are you sure about what you're sure about?
Oh yeah, that's so good. I love that. The way that's put. Yeah, I think everybody. We get overconfident. We get lazy. We get comfortable. And while those things are all true, there is a biological, emotional and measured issue that we as humans have, that we get these biases, and I think that they come into play in in numerous ways, and leaders struggle with it all the time.
And I think they're accentuated in a time when we're really busy because our biases make it easier to move through in some ways because we ignore them. We ignore them even more because we're in a go as fast as we can, get as much done as we can. Let's move on to the next thing.
Well, as humans, our brains are designed to find patterns, right?
Yep.
And that is the foundation of bad things like prejudices and making assumptions about people. That's the foundation of that. But it also allows us as leaders to, assume that this situation is like another one I had, and give us the opportunity to maybe be successful again. But that same muscle, is a challenge. And I think, when we as leaders don't recognize the fact that we are being manipulated by our own brains, that we are not as effective as we can be, and can fall into some traps.
Absolutely. And I think it is important to take time to separate yourself from the day-to-day so that you can analyze those. So I'm sure you have a couple tips, maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah, I think that first, I can probably come up with 3. I think so. The first one I think is really just accept and understand that this is a real thing. One of my favorite HBR, we talked about Harvard Business Review quite a bit. One of my favorite HBR articles is The Leader's Brain, how cognitive biases influence our decision-making. It's a real thing. And, so often we hear about boards that will greenlight a project based on a previous, the previous successes of similar projects will preclude them from looking at this one with the interrogative eyes that they should. I've coached a couple leaders who were, known as Captain Confidence, and they ignored the data-driven insights that were really looking them in the face. And that anchoring bias, really forces them to look at maybe outdated models or outdated assumptions. And without the recognition that this is happening, you're never going to get pushed through it.
Yeah. And if you are showing or illustrating to your team that you're just going to push through it, they're less likely to push back because they can tell you've already made that choice.
Right. And I think that's, you as a leader need to be really effective in your acknowledgement of that. And I think you made a really great point, Susie, there about the stress behaviors that so often, every leader has a stress behavior, and you, as all of our listeners know that there are certain things that we do under stress. Some of us go out and find energy in crowds. Some of us want to go read a good book. Some of us want to take a bath. Some of us work out. But those behaviors are based on stress. And when teams and boards are under stress, they oftentimes will revert to or hide within those biases. So it's more accentuated under stress, but it's a real thing.
Yeah. it is really true to even be able to identify, I am under stress. What
Mm-hmm.
do I need to look at, to your
Right.
point?
Exactly right. Exactly right. And I think that leads to my second point is you really have to up your emotional intelligence of yourself and your
Mhm.
team.
Yeah.
I worked with a really smart individual who was an avid parachutist. Gosh, Dave, I hope that's an accurate phrase. But he jumped out of planes on purpose on the regular. And we talked a lot about the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is, for those of you who don't have Google in front of you, really that's the theory that people who have a limited amount of knowledge about a topic tend to think they are the biggest or the most expertise. And so early on in your understanding of a situation, of a skill or a capability, you quickly believe you're an expert.
Oh,
And then
interesting.
over time, as we know, you get into the room and we say, the smartest man in the room knows he's not the smartest man in the room, or the smartest
Yep.
man thinks or knows he has lots to learn. And
Yeah.
that bias of individuals forces us and causes us to make some interesting decisions. Dunning-Kruger is an example of that. But as leaders, we need to up our emotional intelligence. We need to give our staff and teams the ability to raise their hand and say, hey, you know what? Can we talk about this
Yeah.
from a different point of view? Can we have an honest dialogue? I think, this is not just about biases. It's about just having a healthy team, but this is a really key element to addressing the biases that happen in a boardroom.
Yeah, and it makes me think just about the techniques of that is not having an agenda that you just kind of pose on everybody to get you to the end,
Absolutely.
but think
Absolutely.
about yourself as a facilitator of discussion. So it's
Mm-hmm.
up to you to pull in those opinions and those perspectives. And when you do that, you're forcing yourself, or hopefully you're forcing yourself to listen to
Yeah.
understand what they're saying.
And that makes me think of, the early days of Google. They were doing some amazing things because I think they were very much cognitive aware of the cognitive elements of the ecosystem. And it was the heyday of of the Valley, and where, I think our hearts were bigger than our brains. And, Google's, share, or I'm sorry, they had a mantra of search, learn, and share. And that as a
Yeah.
foundation, and along with, do no evil, that approach towards how you operate really creates a open environment for you to have, that empathy bridge, if you will, to ensure that your team is able to work together and address some of those biases when they see them.
It goes back to what you said about we have patterns. So when you
Mm-hmm.
have a framework like that you kind of have to check the box to say, that's a great way to say, we've done share,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the next two are. I didn't remember well,
Yeah.
but that's a great
Search, learn,
framework to
share.
use.
Yeah.
Search, learn, share. But
Right.
then
Right.
then that pulls out, we
Mm-hmm.
need to follow this. That's such a great example.
Right. Right. I love it. I love it. It keeps people. I think that it's got to be the foundation.
Yeah.
And my third piece of advice is, it's not quite as pithy as, are you sure about what you're sure about? But it is, go into a meeting with a bias, knowing that there will be biases on the table,
Yes,
knowing it's
absolutely.
literally impossible for
Yeah.
us not to see things through the lenses that we have. And so
Yeah.
if you can be a little meta, a little objective, a little out of the dialogue, and see people for looking at the lens that they're looking things through, you can really be very valuable. We bring in outsiders to our meetings and to our companies for that very reason, where they are
Yeah.
looking at it through a different set of biases. You know, one of the companies that I work with had an incredibly difficult exit of some leaders, and it cost them dearly financially due to a brain drain they essentially had. And so when we moved forward with that, they were all really wounded from that experience. And there was really no way for everyone in the room to not look at the next situation through that lens of the previous situation. And so it took me and a couple other folks a lot of effort to say, all right, let's put that other thing aside, and not, let's put the PTSD aside, if you will, and not have that bias that comes with it. And so if you as a leader, that was an extreme example, but if you as a leader can go in knowing that there's going to be a lens through which folks are working, you can usually move the needle and really make a difference when you're having when you're working with a team.
Yeah. And I think one really good question to even ask, to just put it out there to get people to think about it, kind of like right in front of them, is to say, what biases do we have? Before we jump into it,
Mm-hmm.
let's all identify what are the things, and maybe that people say we've faced this before, and
Right.
this is how we did it before, so we might lean on that,
Mm-hmm.
and being able to put kind of those biases on the table.
Yeah, I think that this really ties into the first one as well, which is when you have an educated team and you guys do some reading and understand the biases that you as people have, it's easier to put a name to it and say, hey, I think you're
Yeah.
having this is a confirmation bias. You walked in with this opinion and now we're all stuck to it. Maybe can we do a pros and cons of that? And just use the knowledge of the reality of how our brains are, and there's plenty of hack your brain. Let's find ways
Yeah.
to use it, use our tools to make it to address those issues.
I think that's a bonus option too, is to really think about, have a meeting that's not related to a specific agenda item, and just talk about the biases that you have,
Yeah,
and just
you've
have
got
a conversation around it, because you're
mm-hmm,
right. If you could label them in the moment, you've already talked about it. You've made it safe.
right.
You've talked, but not safe, but you've made it just open. You've made it psychologically safe
Well,
to
and it gives you
say, I
language,
have this.
right?
Yeah.
And it gives you the language to talk about it, right? I mean, how many offsites and events have
Yeah.
we done? I know you and I have been to a couple where there's some weird phrase that the facilitator comes up with,
Yeah.
and then we carry that on for 2 years,
Yeah.
because it just does resonate. And
Yeah.
maybe it's a phrase like, go in with a bias, or maybe it's, are you sure about what you're sure about?
Yeah.
But those things, when you have a language to talk about it
Totally.
with your team, it goes a long way.
Yeah. And I just, to add one more, do you need to zoom out on that? Do you
Yep.
need to look at it from a different perspective? I mean, even just having that visualization of being able to look at it from a lot of different sides
Mm-hmm.
is powerful for our brain to be able to be curious.
Yep.
Allow curiosity, because when you, that closed-mindedness is really what bias creates.
Right.
And so anything you can do to expand that, to get
Well, I
people
think,
to think.
I agree. And I think that's part of the emotional intelligence. So, I think those are all great points.
All right. So what are the three?
One, educate your team. Have a meeting, like you said, Susie. Get everyone on the same page. Talk about biases. Talk about the concept. Understand that this is a part of the fabric of your leadership group, of your staff,
Yep.
of your board. This is how you need to have the language around this, and be able to talk about it in an intelligent way and not in a comical way. I know that happens quite a bit, where people like to take these things to a place where it's not as effective. But be educated, take it seriously, and have a dialogue. Second, build the emotional intelligence of your team so they can have these hard conversations. So you can, without recriminations and negative feedback, you can call somebody out on something. And a team that's more honest with each other and can work in those challenging situations is going to be more effective in the long run. And then the third one, obviously, is go in with a bias. Understand that these are there. If you can have that perspective, you can be look at it through a rose color, no lens, if you will. You can be more effective and really help your team.
Such good tips, and so important to continue to reverberate on that concept.
Yep. It's a good one. And I think this is something you can do all the time too.
Yes.
There's no done on this. You should do this annually. It could be part of your annual planning period. Where are we? Did we fail here? Did we forget to do this? Did we have a confirmation bias on this program?
Yep.
This is a true muscle that you can continue to grow.
That's exactly that. That was a better way of making my point. Thank you for James for really articulating that well. Woohoo! All right. Thanks, James.
Thank you.